الحمد لله نحمده ونستعينه ونستغفره ونعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا ومن سيئات أعمالنا من يهده الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلل فلا هادي له وأشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله صلى الله عليه وعلى آله وأصحابه ومن تبعهم بإحسان إلى يوم الدين أما بعد. So as we continue discussing the book بلوغ المرام من أدلة الأحكام by Hafiz Ibn Hajar al-Asqalani rahimahullah ta'ala, and as we have mentioned that this book, it covers matter pertaining to Hadith al-Ahkam, so matter that relates to halal and haram, that taken directly from the Hadith of the Prophet alayhi salam, where this book is on this topic. So we have ended the Hadith, or we started discussing the bab of al-Ghusl, so matters pertaining to Ghusl wa Ahkam al-Junub. So we started with the Hadith, a few Hadith in the previous lesson, and today inshallah ta'ala we'll be discussing another set of Hadith that cover some of the Ahkam of Ghusl. So we'll have around 2 Hadith to be read and to discuss those 2 or 3 Hadith relating to the topic of al-Ghusl. Aywa.
Alhamdulillah wa salatu wa salam ala Rasulillah. Hadith 96, narrated Salama radiallahu anha. Sulaim, the wife of Abu Talha, said, O Allah's Messenger, Allah is not ashamed of the truth. Is a ghusl, bath, compulsory for a woman when she has a sexual dream? He, sallallahu alayhi wasallam, replied, yes, if she sees signs of the liquid sexual discharge. Agreed upon. Hadith 97, narrated Anas radiallahu anhu. Allah's Messenger sallallahu alayhi wasallam, concerning the matter of a woman experiencing ejaculation during sleep like a man, said she should take a ghusl, bath. Agreed upon. Muslim added, Salam said, does this happen to a woman? He sallallahu alayhi wasallam said, yes, otherwise where does the resemblance of a child to its mother come from?
So those are the hadith that have been mentioned or read. So inshallah ta'ala we'll again read the hadith in Arabic and then we'll start discussing the ahkam that can be taken from these hadith. So as for the hadith that have been mentioned, the Prophet alayhi salam, he mentioned an Salama anna Sulaim ta'ala anhuma وهي إمرة أبي طلحة قالت يا رسول الله عليه السلام إن الله لا يستحي من الحق فهل مرأة الغسل إذا احتلمت قالت نعم إذا رأت الماء. Hadith متفق عليه. Then he mentioned the next hadith and Anas bin Malik رضي عنه قال رسول الله عليه السلام في المرأة ترى في منامها ما يرى الرجل قال تغتسل. متفق عليه. وزاد مسلم وقالت سليم هل يكون هذا قال نعم فمن أين يكون الشبه. So these are the hadith that have been mentioned regarding this discussion regarding ahkam, relating to the ahkam of al-ghusl wal al-janaba. So as for the hadith that have been mentioned, we mentioned 2 hadith. The first hadith will give takrij of the hadith. So as for the first hadith, they mentioned the hadith of Salama and Sulaim. So they mentioned regarding concern that here Imra Abi Talha. Then they mentioned regarding concern as for this particular hadith, as for takrij of the hadith, that the author Ibn Hajar rahimahullah mentioned when he stated the first hadith muttafaqun alayh, the hadith in the Bukhari and Muslim. As for what is said by so Bukhari and Muslim in hadith muttafaqun alayh, mean the hadith in the Bukhari and Muslim. So we see as to those who have done some work on this book as to what they have said. So as for Sheikh Mahir al-Fahl, when he mentioned this hadith in his checking of the book Bulugh Maram, that hadith number 3 he mentioned Sahih. Akhrajahu Abdul Razzaq. So of those who have collected this hadith, Abdul Razzaq, Humaydi, Ahmed, Bukhari, Muslim, Ibn Majah, Tirmidhi, Nasa'i, Ibn Jarud, Ibn Khuzaymah, Ibn Hibban, wal Bayhaqi. So these are of those sources that have collected this hadith. So again, he mentioned Abdul Razzaq, Al-Humaydi, Ahmed ibn Hanbal in his Musnad, Al-Bukhari, Imam Muslim, Ibn Majah, At-Tirmidhi, Nasa'i, Ibn Jarud, Ibn Khuzaymah, Ibn Hibban, wal Bayhaqi. So many who have mentioned this particular hadith. then he mentioned regarding, so that's concerning this particular hadith that had been mentioned regarding this and others who have somewhat make takreej of that hadith. The hadith of Salama, they mention again the hadith which is in al-Bukhari, so this also of takreej of the hadith. But before we go into that one, we'll just mention, highlight something. So this hadith that had been mentioned, that you'll find that in the checking of Bulugh Maram by Sheikh Tariq so they mentioned this hadith. But as for the explanation that have been mentioned, as for the explanation of this hadith, so of those who have explained this book, Fathul Alam fi Dirasa Ahadith Bulugh Maram, one of the Mashaykh from Yemen, that in his book, when he mentioned this hadith, these two hadith, hadith of Salama, Sulaim, that and also the hadith of Anas bin Malik, that in his explanation, that after the hadith, so the hadith that preceded this is the hadith of Abu Hurairah that we have mentioned before, إذا جلس بين شعبها, that if a person, شعبها, that if one sits between the woman 4 parts, ثم جهد, then he put effort, فقد وجبت الغسل, then it's upon him that he should perform ghusl, upon them is ghusl. So after that hadith, which will be the second hadith in this bab of ghusl wa ahkam al-janaba, that they mention here regarding concern that, that after this hadith, according to the explanation, that after the hadith of Abu Hurairah, he goes straight in the hadith of Anas. So he somewhat have missed the hadith of Salama. That's in the explanation. That's not per se. So in some of the explanations, which was the one of Fathul Alam, that in his explanation, the hadith of Salama, Sulaim, it is not mentioned. Regarding concerning, so that hadith is not mentioned, he goes straight from the hadith of Abu Hurairah, and he goes straight to the hadith of Anas bin Malik. As for the hadith that is in between, the hadith of Salama, that it is not mentioned. And that's in the explanation. That's in the explanation. So those who may have this explanation, to be just mindful of this. So as for others who have done some form of, so I said that that the first hadith of Salama, they have mentioned regarding concern of those of way of takreej, in briefly, the hadith in the Bukhari, ومسلم, Tirmidhi, Nasa'i, Ahmed, Ibn Khuzaymah, Bayhaqi, Abu Awana, Malik fil Muwatta, Ibn Hibban. So they mentioned the hadith is in this particular hadith is in all these books. So some have been, some are mentioned, so some are mentioned by others regarding takreej, but he mentioned some additional sources that were not mentioned by others. So again, he mentioned Bukhari, all mentioned Bukhari, Muslim, Tirmidhi, Nasa'i, Ahmed, Ibn Khuzaymah, Bayhaqi. Then also you have, as addition to this, then you also have Ibn Hibban. But in addition, you have Abu Awana, that the previous Sheikh Mahir did not mention. And also he mentioned that it's in Muwatta of Imam Malik, where Sheikh Mahir didn't mention this hadith of Sulaim in his takhrij. And he mentioned this hadith of his, the hadith is mentioned by Sulaim, who is Zainab bint Salama, and Salama, قال جاها Sulaim. So they mentioned that Salama, that mentioned that Jahat Sulaim. So Sulaim, she came and she went and asked the Prophet ﷺ regarding this matter that was posed to him regarding what a woman sometime may experience in their dream. As for this particular hadith that they have mentioned, that the one who's the questioner is Sulaim. So the questioner is Sulaim, that she's the one who posed the question. Also, you find this hadith, also you find that others who have asked a similar question on this topic. He mentioned that of others who have asked a similar question, you have Khawla bint Hakam, Rata'ala anha, that her narration, or asking this a question similar to this, it is found in Ahmed in his Musnad. Also Sahala bint Sahl, also another Sahabiya, who also posed a question like this. Her name is Sahla bint Sahl, and her hadith is in At-Tabarani in his book Al-Kabir. A third Sahabiya who asked this question, Busra bint Safwan. So those are 3 Sahabiyat who have asked somewhat a similar question. And her hadith is found in the Musnad of Ibn Abi Shaybah. So in Ibn Abi Shaybah, that she asked her a question where they asked concerning فيه يا رسول الله عليه السلام إحدانا ترى أنها مع زوجها في المنام. That they ask concerning that we have a dream where we see ourselves with our husband in a dream, meaning that having intimacy, they see themselves in a dream having intimacy with their husband. Then they mention قال إذا وجدت بلبلا you should perform ghusl ya busra. So that's concerning hadith of busra. So you find other sahabiyat other than Sulaim who have asked somewhat similar question to the Prophet ﷺ regarding this particular matter. So several sahabiyat. Then I mentioned the hadith also. You find hadith of Aisha radiallahu anha that's inside Muslim that can somewhat give us regarding concern it now that أن إمرأة قالت يا رسول الله السلام هل تغتسل المرأة إذا اتلمت وأبصرت الماء. So also you find other women who have asked regarding this matter. The hadith of Aisha that also a lady came and posed this question and she asked regarding it now if a woman has a wet dream and she find wetness then Islam is she to perform ghusl faqal? Nam. Then the Prophet Islam he mentioned yes. So those are the hadith that regard this that discuss this matter, and as we mentioned the hadith in the Bukhari wa Muslim as mentioned. The second hadith of Anas bin Malik that I mentioned the hadith in the Muslim. So he mentioned concerning that the second hadith that he mentioned here of Anas bin Malik where the Prophet Islam mentioned that في المرأة ترى في منامها ما يرى الرجل فقال تغتسل. Where the Prophet Islam that I mentioned متفق عليه. So the hadith according to he mentioned here متفق عليه. Of the ulama mentioned that when he mentioned متفق عليه as stated before it means the hadith is in Bukhari and Muslim. متفق عليه means the hadith is collected both by Imam Bukhari in his Sahih and also Imam Muslim in his Sahih. But I mentioned when he mentioned, so he said متفق عليه regarding the hadith in relation to the hadith of Anas bin Malik. Most of those have highlighted that Ibn Hajar rahimahullah that he made an error in this matter. So they mentioned regarding concern, even though he said متفق عليه, like Sheikh Fahl, that he mentioned that with this particular hadith, when he mentioned this hadith, متفق عليه, hadith of Anas bin Malik, that he states concerning that Sahih, that he mentioned that in the hadith Sahih, أخرجه أحمد, دارمي, مسلم, ابن ماجه, نسائي, Abu Yala, Ibn Hibban, والبيهقي. So these are the sources that he mentioned regarding the hadith of Anas bin Malik. Ibn Hajar rahimahullah, Hafiz, Ibn Hajar rahimahullah, he mentioned the hadith متفق عليه, meaning the hadith in Bukhari and Muslim. But when the takhrij is given by others and they give the source of the hadith, they mention, according to Sheikh Mahir, he mentioned Ahmed, Darami, Muslim, Ibn Majah, Nasa'i, Abu Yala, Ibn Hibban, والبيهقي. If we notice, there's no mention of Bukhari. There's no mention of Bukhari. So they mentioned that, that Ibn Hajar rahimahullah mentioned Waham, that Afid Ibn Hajar rahimahullah, he made an error in this case of referencing the hadith back to Bukhari. The hadith is only with Muslim, not with Bukhari. So the hadith is found inside Muslim, but it is not found in Sahih al-Bukhari, contrary to what has been stated here by Ibn Hajar by saying muttafaqun alayh. So that's an error that most of those who have done some work on this book, Bulugh al-Maram, that I've mentioned, that's an error on the part of Ibn Hajar, where he cited the hadith as referencing the hadith back to Sahih Bukhari, but the hadith is not in Sahih Bukhari. So for those who have this print, and I mentioned muttafaqun alayh, to put that not Muslim only, or Muslim, not Bukhari. Muslim, not Bukhari. So also others, when they mention hadith, that they mention hadith of Anas, أخرجه Muslim, Nasa'i, Ibn Majah, Ahmed, Bayhaqi, and they mention there Isnad. And they mention that again, فقد نسب حافظ الحديث إلى البخاري ولا يوجد عند البخاري من حديث أنس. That is hadith of Anas, it is not per se mentioned in Sahih Bukhari. So this narration of Anas bin Malik is not found in Sahih Bukhari on Anas bin Malik. So something was mentioned that Ibn Hajar rahimahullah again has made an error on this matter. So for those who have a copy or watch following lesson, for them to take note of this. And it shows regarding that Ibn Hajar rahimahullah that Bashar yukhti wa yusib, so he made an error on this matter. So that's concerning that they mentioned that with the hadith also there's a ziyada of the hadith of Anas that they mentioned that some additional wording that is found in the hadith of Zada Muslim, where Imam Muslim rahimahullah, that he mentioned the hadith with this ziyada. So overall, that those two hadith, the first hadith of Salama and Sulaim, وهي, and she's the wife of Abu Talha, that she said, Ya Rasulullah, she posed that question. And we mentioned also you have others among the Sahabiyat that have posed this particular question to the Prophet ﷺ, other than Sulaim. You have Sahla bint Sahl, Busra bint Safwan, who have asked this question. Also Sulaim. So several women of Khawla bint Hakam. So you have these several Sahabiyat that have posed this question to the Prophet ﷺ regarding this particular matter. So it shows that the Sahabiyat will ask question, especially matter that affected female. So that will be of the benefits to be discussed or mentioned regarding the hadith. So as for the ahkam that can be taken from the hadith, that they discussed regarding the first of those ahkam that is discussed regarding the hadith, where it mentioned that the meaning that inna Allah la yastahi min al-haq. And it shows regarding that, that haya, that regarding that mentioned regarding al-haya, that women by nature are women that they have this quality of being of those who that they have a sense of modesty, shyness about them. So that level of shyness amongst female, of having istihya, to have this shyness, then is something that they mentioned that was present, but also on matters of deen, then this haya, it is put aside. So regarding concerning in seeking of knowledge and matter that relates to the deen, then the person have to be more bold and more and forthcoming in asking matter regarding the deen, and not allow haya to stop them from asking matters about the deen and getting clarity on the deen. So if a matter, so with this they mention regarding concern that the woman that so they pose this question and put aside regarding that and put precedent in seeking clarity over remaining in ignorance. As for the ahkam that can be taken from the hadith, they mention that one regarding the masail halat ar-ru'ya. So regarding concern that this hadith is asking regarding a woman who may have a wet dream. What's the ruling pertaining to them? Is it the same as a man, as a male, or not? The Prophet has mentioned yes. So regarding concern, if a woman was to have a wet dream and a discharge from this wet dream, where they're seeing themselves having some form of intimacy or engage in an act of intimacy, so from this they have a discharge, then it's considered to be, as they mentioned, that so this is this type of this is what is being discussed regarding this type of act, which is having a wet dream. And then there is a discharge or a lack of discharge. What's the hukum regarding that matter? So regarding concerning having a wet dream, that they mentioned that a person have a wet dream, and in the morning they recall that they had a wet dream, and they see water. They see some type of wetness, dampness in their pants, in their underwear. So the person, or they find wetness or dampness. In that case, they mentioned if that's the case, a person had a wet dream. In the morning, they recall having that wet dream, and when they look, they find that there's some dampness, water on their garment, their underwear or whatever garment is worn. Then what is the hukum? They mention yajib is compulsory in this case for them to perform ghusl. Wet dream, recall having one, seeing the wetness in one's clothing, then in that case the person perform ghusl. It's compulsory in that case to perform ghusl. The second scenario is the person have a wet dream, then in the morning they recall having a wet dream in the morning, but they do not see anything. So they had a wet dream. In the morning when they wake, they recall having the wet dream, but they do not see any dampness or wetness. No sign of any form of discharge. So in that case, the person, laysa alayhi ghusl. There's no ghusl upon them. because there's no signs of wetness. The third scenario is that أن لا يذكر, that a person doesn't recall having a wet dream, but he sees something. He doesn't recall having a wet dream, but he finds that there's dampness around him. So he sees something. So in this case, when a person that he sees something, when he wakes, he sees some type of dampness in his clothing, but he doesn't recall having a dream, a wet dream. So in this case, they mention that what's upon this person? They mention فَعَلَيْهِ is upon him, that they mention فَعَلَيْهِ ghusl. So he doesn't recall, but he finds the wetness. So the proof, he sees something that is there. So based upon this, then they mention that فَعَلَيْهِ الْغُسْل. On this third scenario, then upon the person, they should perform ghusl. They should perform ghusl. So these are the three scenarios that the ulama somewhat are in agreement regarding. If you fall into one of those categories, then you apply the ruling that goes with it. And those three categories, there's a clear ruling that goes with it. So the person will apply the appropriate ruling based upon one of these three cases that were mentioned. Then, and I mentioned the Prophet when he said in the case concerning Nam, إِذَا رَأْتَ الْمَاءَ, that if you see the water, then you perform ghusl. So if you find wetness, dampness, indicating a form of discharge, then you perform ghusl. Then I mentioned that a second case of this, that mentioned that the person that he finds, wakes, and he finds wetness on his clothing, but he's not certain if this wetness that he sees, it is from many or other. So it's unclear, but there's wetness, but he's not clear as to what this wetness is. Is it many, semen discharge, or sexual discharge of semen, or something else, urine or the likes? Is unclear as to what happened. So in that case, they mentioned that so for the person to investigate the matter, because he finds some type of wetness, but he's unclear, uncertain as to what it is. Is it semen or something else? Urine or whatever he thinks it may be. So the person can somewhat try it now to look into matter, to investigate the matter further. And of this way, concerning يتحرى, so the person tried to investigate the matter and try to be as accurate as possible, and of the ways to determine what it is, the person can use of the smell. So you can use concerning the smell. What does it smell like? So that of a way to determine what it is. And if the person overall that he feels he more inclined, that he believes there more possibility that it is many, so he believes that it is more possibility that it is many, then for him to perform ghusl, wajib, it's compulsory upon him to perform ghusl. So the person, when he looks and he smells that he is more inclined that what the discharge is actually many, then in that case the person must perform ghusl. So he goes according to what he feels that the greater possibility from looking into the matter. Then he mentioned that إذا غلبت على ظني, if the person somewhat he believes more strongly that it is madhi, it's not semen discharge, it's something else, then in that case ليس عليه غسل. So it is for example urine, or it could be madhi, then ليس عليه غسل. It is pre-sexual discharge, so there is no ghusl upon him because it is not many. So that's concerning those cases, the person of that scenario that but he feels more strongly regarding one thing over another, then if he believes that it is more likely to be many, then he performs ghusl and a must upon him. If you feel it is not, it is something else, then he does not perform ghusl and he perform wudu, or what is appropriate. But ghusl does not become compulsory upon him. If the person is unclear after looking, trying to investigate, smell, is unclear which way it is, it is not clear as to which what it actually is, even after looking, and is not inclined to a particular one over the other, then I mention that the person then, and he still remain doubtful, still in a doubt regarding the matter, then it is mentioned that of the ulama who have, in this case they mention قال مجاهد and also قتادة لا غسل عليه, that there is no ghusl upon the person in that case. So in this scenario, he's unclear what it is. He has doubt and is unable to make a decision, a more clear decision as to what it is. He's still uncertain, still in doubt. So in that case, the person then, they mention that of the ulama mention لا غسل عليه, that there is no ghusl to be carried out in this case. And of those who take the position, they mention Mujahid, Qatada, and others. They mention Malik, Hamad, Shafi'i, Ishaq, Abu Yusuf, Ahmed for Riwayah. So you find that many of the ulama who have mentioned, or a group of the ulama who take the view that is the person that there is no ghusl upon him because he's in doubt. And there's nothing that he has found that he's unable to make a decision on the matter. So in this case, he doesn't perform al-ghusl. But a second opinion, and they mention that, that the reason they come to this conclusion, that a person that the asl of yaqeen is that he's in the state of tahara. So al-yaqeen wal-asl annahu, that a person upon tahara until he has something to say otherwise, in a state of purity, until he can determine otherwise. So I mentioned that al-yaqeen la yazul bishak. So the person, he goes back to what is the certain thing, which is in a state of tahara, until he can prove that he has done something that requires for him to perform ghusl. He has to have certainty for that. So la yazul al-yaqeen bishak. So the person doesn't leave something which is clear for something which is doubtful, something which is certain for something which is doubtful. But if the person choose to perform ghusl, then la bas. That ihtiyatan or izalat shak, the person wish to take himself out of that doubtful situation and just perform ghusl, la, they mention, then that is awla, then that is preferred to be done. That is preferred to be done. The second opinion, قال بعض العلماء وجوب الغسل عليه. In that case, the person is uncertain of doubt, then in that case, the person would perform, they mention, it's a must upon them to perform ghusl. And that's قول of عطاء وشعبي والنخعي وسفيان وأبي حنيفة وأحمد في الرواية and others. So they mention that in that case, the person, it's a must upon them to perform ghusl in this case of having doubt. So that's concerning so that's the aqwal of the ulama on this matter, that on this particular matter. Then our next topic that is discussed regarding this hadith, إذا رأى المني في ثوبي أو فراشي. If a person wakes up and that they find that there's semen discharge on his thobe, his clothing, or his bed. So the person that he had a dream, and the person that he saw many, the person who finds that he has semen on his clothing, or farash. So they mention that in that case, concern that the person, he find that on his clothing, his underwear, his pants, he find that or bed area that he was lying, he find that there's money there, then I mention فَعَلَيْهِ ghusl. The person, he finds money discharge on his clothing, or he slept somewhere and when he woke up and left and then came back to that place, he found that it is wet and is money. Then in that case they mention فَعَلَيْهِ ghusl. Upon this person to perform al-ghusl, upon the person to perform al-ghusl. As there's a possibility that it was, that most likely it's from him, because he was the one who, as I said, last rests there, and his clothing, he's the one who's wearing it. So the possibility, most likely, it is from him. So upon him to perform ghusl, because what he found is money. So whether it is in his bed that he slept in and got up, then he left the bed and came back and found money at some point, then it's considered to be his. And based upon this, then a person perform ghusl. And whatever salat he may have prayed, then you have to repeat those salah. Whatever salat he have prayed since that incident, then he has to perform ghusl. He has to repeat those salat. They mention the next scenario, that if the person, that bed is shared with others. The person got up out of his bed, but that bed is shared with others. Then as for that case, they mentioned that la ghusl upon the person. La ghusl, that bed, he found that bed money, but that bed, he used that bed and others. He and others have used that bed. So in that case, then I mentioned that there's nothing upon him as and he doesn't see anything directly from himself that he can that go back to himself, then there's nothing upon the person on that matter. As junub is something that it's not the norm, so unless he can prove otherwise, then it is not his. So that's concerning some of the ahkam that is taken from this particular hadith, some of the ahkam that can be taken from this particular hadith. So from the hadith of the fawaid, it shows regarding from both hadith of Anas or Sulaim that a woman also can have wet dream. That a woman also can have wet dream, and if she finds anything after, then the same ahkam that applies to men would applies to a woman in this case. So it applies to a male, it applies to a female. So women can have wet dream, and if they find anything, then any discharge from that wet dream, then they should perform ghusl. They should perform ghusl. And also you find that the child also have a resemblance of their parents, that based upon that the water come from both of them. So the child take the appearance of the parents based upon that the water which came from both. Also it shows regarding this hadith that women asking questions or seeking fatwa and clarity. So it showed of those women that they approach the Prophet ﷺ or with other women, and they pose a question to the Prophet ﷺ regarding matters that they needed clarity on, and also practical matters. So it shows regarding the Sahabiyat at times that a woman is to display haya, shyness, but it should not stop them from seeking answers regarding matters that pertain to themselves and their worship to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So if they need clarity, then they contact the appropriate person regarding those matters, but also they speak in a way which is, as I said, professional, a way that would not to arouse that person and to speak on things unnecessarily. So, and also the way that they pose a question, that they mention that pose a question without being without giving too much information. And I mentioned, إن الله لا يستحي من الحق فهل على المرأة الغسل إذا اتلمت. So I mentioned that, and if the woman have a wet dream, so try to be the woman that their question is somewhat to the point, but they are allowed to ask a question. They are allowed to ask a question. So that matter, inshaAllah, those are some of the ahkam that are taken from this particular hadith. And we'll continue discussing other hadith as mentioned by Ibn Hajar rahimahullah in this particular collection of Bulugh Maram. So with that, inshaAllah, we'll end for today and continue with the next session. وبالله تعالى توفيق وهذه السبيل والآخرة والحمد لله. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.